So we'll call our meeting back to order. This is the Senate Ag Committee. It's Thursday, April 14th, and we're going to be talking in regards to S-278 in relating to the expansion and the prime ag soils mitigation issue that has arisen because of the expansion there at the airport. We're going to have Gus Seelick with us. I don't think he has joined us yet, but we have Trina Rossai. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, correct.
And I guess we would like to hear about the plans. You folks have some buildings there, I believe, as well as you were trying to figure out maybe something to do with the field days and their use of other state lands. So do you have any updates on that issue?
So the state of Vermont has been undergoing quite a bit of development at all our airports to make improvements to existing infrastructure and to add safety improvements to make them more usable and try to bring in business and additional users to help the economy. What we're undergoing right now in Franklin is a complete reconstruction of the existing runway, and we're adding 1,001 feet to it, which will allow for slightly larger aircraft to come in. And this has been driven by some potential businesses that would like to locate there, as well as some of the existing uses that we have there now. Part of the work that we've been undertaking was at the direction of the legislature to do some master permitting at all our airports. This was to allow businesses that are coming in and want to locate on our airports, if they meet the criteria, to be able to get through Act 250 and other permitting quicker. That's underway. There's a fair amount of interest in private hangar development around at the different airports also. Where we're at with field days was allowed to go on the state airport property until it was needed for aviation purposes. We now need that for aviation purposes.
And how many years has that been?
My understanding is they went on in the late 80s.
Yeah.
About 30 years.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
And we've had those discussions with them now. I bet it's been 8-9 years that we've been having the discussion with them of transitioning them to a new location. And it didn't become urgent until we had some expressed interest from a couple of businesses in locating on that airport.
Yeah. And so if this all moves forward, have you located a different, are you folks looking for a plot to put the field days, or are they looking for a plot, or how are they gonna get rid of their buildings that are there? How's that all set up?
So right now there's a group that has gathered. It has some folks from the local community, the field days, V-Trans, Agency of Commerce, and Agency of Ag, as well as some local legislators. We're looking at what the needs are, what the needs will look like going out 10 and 20 years, and then looking at property that's in the area that would meet those needs.
Yeah, and that's all something where you meet once in a while or on a monthly or way or?
So right now it's, the meetings are being scheduled as the work items are being completed.
Yeah,
So there's a variety of people working on different pieces of it, to bring it back together.
Brian?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, welcome. Assuming you can find a suitable plot, how quickly can you make all of this happen?
Well, I'd like to say very quickly, but, a new location would have to go through an environmental assessment. Just like any development, it would have to be permitted, and then the transition would need to take place. So we believe that the majority of the buildings that were constructed on the existing site would need to just be demolished. So it's a lot of new buildings going up. We're looking at a 2 to 3 year time range for this to happen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Well, thank you, Trina, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks.
So Gus, you can sit right up with us if you'd like. If you don't like that steel chair, you can come in a more comfortable chair.
You should keep the witnesses on their toes.
I'll make them feel comfortable.
Um,
It's like when you go to Senate appropriations and you sit in the chair, you're.
Yeah, it's lower on
floor.
purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's intentional. Bad. Yeah, people only like to come once and that way it kind of keeps that all going. So Gus, good morning. Good to have you with us. We were wondering if this project at the airport has to go through ag mitigation because of ag lanes. What we're trying to thinking about doing, we haven't really done anything yet, but this is a big economic, could be a big economic driver for Franklin County. And from what I know and what Corey has told us and what we have seen, that airport is located on very poor ag lands. And then basically there's sand pits around two sides of it at least. And was wondering about trying to figure out a way to do away with that mitigation cost because of it's a couple $300,000, and wanted to chat with you to see how big a problem that, if we did go that route and did accomplish it, how big a problem that might create for your agency, because that's where a lot of that mitigation money goes to offset the loss of that farmland. But, I've been going by that personally, by that airport my whole life. But we worked for years for Swanton Limestone. And so during all those years, used to go by at least once a week, not more often. And I can never remember any good ag products being grown on that particular property. But I do remember meeting the sand trucks for years, drawing sand from all around that. So anyways, that's why we asked you in. And then can talk about other things once we get beyond that.
So it's above my pay grade to determine the right policy. That's your job. And I'm just going to tell you what the program, how the program has worked and how it came about and what its financial impact has been over time. And this is not something that the Housing and Conservation Board created. What actually happened back in the early 90s is a Franklin County developer named Phil Gerbode went to the environmental board of the district commission and he said, you folks want me to mitigate my development on site. And I don't think that's the best idea to protect ag soils. And I'd like to pay a fee so that you can conserve some land other places. And they said that's not a bad idea. And I think as you look at like in Chittenden County, you see these developments and they're surrounded by 10 acres of green space because of the mitigation requirements. I think Secretary Ross used to call them stranded parcels. So the history of the mitigation program was, and just to go back a little further, when you created the board, you sent us all down on a trip with Jean Ann Duffy and other members down to southern New England, to Massachusetts and Connecticut. And the advice they gave us back then was, don't try to save a farm in every town in the state. Try to invest in ag communities because suburbanization is not friendly to agriculture, because you want to conserve not just the land or the farms, but the infrastructure that supports the farms. And I think that philosophy went into the idea that we ought to have an off-site option for development rather than an on-site option. Sometime, and somebody else can tell you this, in statute, this program that was created by the environmental board was codified. We had a memorandum of understanding with now what you call the Natural Resources Board. We are not involved in the negotiations of where off-site mitigation should take place and where it shouldn't. And we don't set the price. The Ag Secretary does that annually. So they're the statutory party to Act 250 proceedings, and they're the people who negotiate this. When you codified the program, over the last 11 years, we've received about $4.7 million from mitigation fees from 120 different developments, and turned around and used that to do two things. One is to invest in conserving about 12,000 acres, mostly in the districts from which the impact occurred. We're allowed to go outside the district, but we try to keep the money nearby. That's been generally matched by the Natural Resource Conservation Service dollar for dollar. So the monies we've received that we put into deals has also turned into a match from the feds of a dollar for every dollar.
How many years?
This is over the last 11 years. I didn't go back to the beginning of time, but I just looked at the last 11 years. There have been three different airports, I think Middlebury, Rutland, and one other, Newport, that have paid mitigation fees. On the chart that I have, there's a fee from the Agency of Transportation in Berlin for a couple $1,000s. And that might be the Berlin airport, but maybe there was a different project they paid a fee for. So that's the general history. The other thing you allow us to do is to take costs for ourselves from the program, which we don't do. We cover that out of the trust fund and other parts of our appropriation. And you allow us to provide funding to the Agency of Agriculture for their costs as a statutory party. And they've gotten about $80,000 a year over those 12 years from us to participate in Act 250 proceedings. I think the policy issues here, you folks can sort out better than me in terms of how you weigh the public goods of airport and economic development. I think you should just be aware that there will be lots of other people that will knock on your door, and you can decide whether it's good policy or bad policy have an ag mitigation program saying my project is going to be a public good as well. So I think that's the question for you to, I understand, and I think this is probably the closest that there's recently been testimony asking for forestry, like mill projects, to be exempt from paying the fees, which from a rural community development perspective makes sense. And if you think agriculture and silviculture are one and the same, you can make that argument. So I leave it to you to sort it out. It is not the major source of funding for our program. That comes from the transfer tax and from the capital bill. So, you know, if we're getting about on average 400,000 a year, sometimes a little more, sometimes it's less. We're spending state dollars usually around 2.5 million a year, also matched by the feds on our ag programs. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, the budget you got from the other body would increase our base funding this year. So I don't know if that's going to hold on the Senate side or not, but that will more than offset a loss here. So I think, you know, I leave it to you folks to figure out how you set the public goods. But that's the history, and that's what's happening up now. Laurie?
Where I make the distinction in my mind, Gus, I think you make a good point, is where do you draw that line? For airports, the reason I see it differently than other properties is we've already committed these. The FAA doesn't allow crops to be grown there. We've already taken them out of any potential agricultural use as a state. We've already made that policy decision in my mind by allowing these airports to be these airports where they are. And so, you know, to me, that's the distinction. So if a developer comes up and, you know, wants to do something, you know, on private land or on, you know, or Phil, I've seen Phil's developments, Gervaudes, those were on ag soils. Those were farms before he built homes there, and you know that makes sense in my mind. But in these areas, we've already taken them out of ag. So if anything, the state should have paid this, but this system was around when we had airports. Should have paid it when we made them airports years ago, because that's when we actually took them out of ag production and ag use.
Yeah. But the thing that I'm concerned about, if we do this, I don't want to be setting a precedent so that a developer that blows into Vermont and wants to do whatever doesn't, you know, gets away without doing this. And that, I think that's the bigger issue. And the other issue is that, and we've heard a lot about it very recently out of Burlington about the electric plane outfit wanting to do something by the Burlington airport, and they're having trouble with the city. And I heard that they're thinking even about going to Plattsburgh, where it would be much cheaper. Well, the other way across the lake is right at, instead of by Barry, is up goes across the bridge in Alberg. And so we don't want to chase companies out of here that might be good for our economy and jobs for, I don't know for who, because every building business I go by, there's a sign in the window hiring.
So
I
we need
don't
more
know.
dense and affordable housing, which Gus and I agree on.
Well, and that's just, all I'm trying to say is,
Yeah,
you know, I think Charlie Hancock makes a good argument, because I think logging, agriculture, silviculture, you could say that's the same thing. When I look down the list of projects, one of the payments came from Gifford Hospital. So the hospitals could say, you know, all I'm saying is there will be a line of people, but I think you have already in statute, and this might be another way, housing projects in certain places, I think, pay a 1-to-1 fee rather than a higher fee. So that's a different weigh at the issue as well. So I've never run for anything more than town moderator. You guys chose to run for these seats and make the hard calls.
Well put.
I hadn't thought of that part of it.
Well put.
And I know you just raised.
It means we're probably the wrong people to make the decisions.
So let me just ask us, are any of these other parties likely to have sort of a federal intersection like we have here with the FAA? That, to me, Senator Parent raises a really cogent point, I think. The difference here is we really don't have a choice. I mean, in terms of what we can do with that land.
Not that I am aware
Okay.
of. All I'm saying is other people will argue.
Absolutely understood.
Here's my public good
Yeah.
too. Here's my contribution to the
Sure.
economy, to healthcare, to housing. So that's all I'm saying.
Yep.
I'm not-
Understood.
Are there different percentages that can be called for on what the mitigation money would add up to, 1%, 5%?
So you'll have to get the ag agency in to talk about how they calculate it. What they do is we give them appraisal information from buying development rights. And they set it by region in terms of what the fee is going to be each year. I think the statute talks about, how much mitigation you pay, and I can't recall whether it's 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. There is a standard for, that they use for what are called under Act 250 primary agricultural soils, which NRCS will tell you are both prime soils, but also statewide soils. So the Natural Resource Conservation Service definition of prime soils is different than the state's Act 250's definition of primary ag soils. And they can walk you, again, we don't sit at the table and negotiate these things. We're the recipient of the money to reinvest in other farms.
And that's
So-
done through ag?
And that's done by the ag agency. And, they can tell you how they do it. And every year the commissioner gets a bunch of data and he says, okay, for Addison County, the rate is going to be X. For Franklin County, it's Y. For Chittenden County, it would be Z. I can tell you we conserved the farm in Stowe this year. So Stowe Airport came in. Between the time we originally agreed to conserve it and when we closed, the value went up 50%. In Stowe. And so if the airport there if you don't do something and the airport there needed to expand for this reason, they'd probably be in the worst shape of anybody in the state right now because the value is so high there.
I know across the road from this property is the John Deere dealer.
Mhm.
And if you go down over the embankment and back of the John Deere dealer, and you get on that land next to the Missisquoi River,
Mhm.
now you're talking about some very special ag soils. I mean,
Well, and those are the ones that NRCS would call prime, that river bottom land.
oh, that's beautiful.
In the Connecticut River, the Hadley soil is, the most productive in the state. And it's
Yeah, if that land was sitting where the airport is, we wouldn't even be having this discussion because I'd say tough luck. But in the middle of a sand pit, it's not growing really good ag products.
Yeah,
Well-
I was not aware of what you just raised, Senator, of the FAA and Senator Parent raised, that the FAA will not allow crops to be grown on that land. I assume that means no hay either, so that is something that is distinctive from all the other folks that I told you might.
Their big thing is they have to do pest control or nuisance control, like deer or anything. They have to keep them off the runway, so you can't have corn or soybeans or anything growing nearby.
Senator Pearson?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, Gus. I'm, I guess my question is maybe more for Senator Parent. Did you say it was about $340,000? That's what. we're
That
talking-
was a number we got last year in testimony. I don't know the exact what this specific piece would be, but it's, you know, it's whatever their grade, because it is dependent on their grades. And I know Trini just sent me an email this morning. I haven't read through it. I don't know if it just went to me, that showed the soils where the runway is going, kind of to give a flavor for that.
I guess I'm just sensitive to what Gus is saying about, you know, this seems like a small crack, and through small cracks, many others will try to fit. And what about, I wonder, Mr. Chair, for you and Approps, I mean, there is, even in this tough budget, or, you know, different budget time than where we thought we were 2 months ago, one-time money floating around. What if we just paid it as part of economic development budget, and sort of handled it that way to take care of the need, but not create this crack that could give us headaches down the road? I wonder what others think about that idea.
But I am looking, there is some state farmland of statewide importance on the airport. There is some of those soils. I mean, it's a tough map that just came to me. You can kind of see these MSA ones are actually the ones that they still want to protect. You know, sandy dust, I don't know how they got,
You mean the red?
no, it looks like the blue. At least I don't want to read this stuff that well. I'm not an expert in it, but it's Missisquoi loamy sand, which does say farmland of statewide importance that's rating, which to me, if we're saying it's loamy sand, it's sand, but tough to grow there.
I don't know, Chris. This won't be happening for at least a year or so. The predictions are that, you know, we're going back to basically a 2% increase in our overall funds into the future. We're supposed to be getting one more shot of federal money that might become available for something, you know, for whatever.
Well,
But I gotta think about, you know, this a little bit more, because I certainly don't want us to get in a position where we're setting any precedent. And, you know, if you're gonna do, I don't know, $200 million worth of building up there, and so you have to pay 150, 200,000 in mitigation fees.
The problem is the $200 million building will go to Plattsburgh where they're giving them money.
Well,
not making them-
Yeah,
yeah, but I don't feel bad for those guys that may have to pay a little bit on $100 million. I mean, I built a little building that.
My guess is no one will be building there if they have to pay, especially on the other side of the lake, 30 minutes away. I mean, you're gonna still in the same
well,
employees.
so, you know, there's a lot of discussions to be had here, but under the
Yeah.
premise of we want that business development at the airport. So yesterday, you all may remember, I've not been a big fan of us paying people to move here and put more pressure on our housing and earn good money. And it's just, I think that program's silly. But there's $5 million of one-time money to beef that program up. Just yesterday, JFO sent us an updated analysis. We got some consultant wrote a report about how great that program is. Just yesterday, JFO revised their impression of the analysis and basically I think it's a technical term. They said it was complete rubbish. And there was no correlation to that investment and growing jobs in Vermont. Very clearly, what Senator Parent's talking about is jobs in Vermont. So my guess is I will not prevail. We'll continue to fund this Move to Vermont will pay your expenses program, but you could give it a little haircut. You could give it a tiny haircut, pay for something like this. It's clearly in the same universe of job creation, and
Oh, yeah.
get Senator Parent. I mean, we got to make sure he's well taken care of, right, Bobby? So anyway,
I told him that. I told him I really didn't give a hoot. He's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. No, I was gonna say, a couple of years ago, I built a building, it cost $150,000, basically. It cost me $14,000 for my permits and hey, I had to suck it up. There was no free lunch going around then, and I wouldn't ask for a free lunch. But I mean, if they're going to employ couple hundred people there,
The estimates of the airport could employ up to 1,200 people.
That's a lot more than the Move to Vermont program brought us. For sure.
But anyways, I think we need to investigate these other avenues of money before we, throw out this mitigation thing. And so, but I think it's worthy of consideration. So, Jackie, we did already talked about the field days and there's a group meeting. You got to run, Gus?
I can,
Okay.
I can sit right here if you need me for a few minutes.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to stay. So we talked to Trina and there's a group made up of a variety of people. I would expect the field days over there, they have people in that group. And they're meeting and talking as they, get things put together on the move. And I guess the numbers aren't, location and numbers on cost and all that haven't floated to the top yet. And but at least we did ask about it, what was happening and how long the field days have been there and all those things. So it looks to me like it's something's gonna be coming from all this by the next legislative session. So we don't really want to go too far because we don't know who's going to be here. And, but somebody will be here and they'll have to deal with it.
Thank you, Senator. I was listening to the conversation and I appreciate the efforts that are being made on behalf of Franklin County Field Days. I would just say that I haven't heard any of the information coming out of the committee, but as their lobbyist, I just want to make sure that going forward, they are not the ones that are going to have to absorb the cost of this. I mean, now I'm hearing that their buildings are going to have to be torn down. And if you've been up there recently, some of those buildings are not that old. They also have a tractor pull area that's going to have to be redone. And I'm hearing about the permitting, and as I've heard from the conversation, how that goes, how expensive it is and how it can drag on. So I'm hoping going forward, and I just throw out the suggestion, and I know that it probably won't be greeted well, but instead of having these companies that want to come in there and pay the ag mitigation fee, I think it would be very generous of them to say, we're going to help the community and this money will go towards moving and reinvigorating Franklin County Field Days. It would be a great gesture from any company coming in, and it would keep the money in Vermont, and it would still do some good, and it would still require them to pay something. So whether it comes out of the VTrans budget in the future, or whether it comes out of somebody doing a gesture of goodwill, shall we say, I'm just advocating, and I will be here next year. Hopefully many of you will be too, so we can continue the conversation so that we can resolve this issue with the field days and make everybody whole.
And Jackie, I'll push back on that as the Franklin County Senator too, though. I mean, the whole point of what we're trying to do is because we're competing with Plattsburgh, where they're throwing money at these companies, and so to be like, oh, you don't have to pay the mitigation language, but send it to field days doesn't accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to make this, and to be quite honest with you, as much as I love field days, the economic development opportunity here is far beyond what we get out of 1 week. And I think, obviously field days is, I agree with you, should get some state money in the move, and we're working that way. They've known for a while that this move was going to need to take place, and they've never owned their own land. So I think this is a benefit for field days to make this move, that eventually they could end up with some land in a better location. So I understand that's not popular with everyone, but the economic opportunity for the county here is far beyond what that could be in my mind.
I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate, Senator Parent, all your enthusiasm, and I don't disagree in regards to the economic development. The challenge that I have is that, yes, the field days has known for a while, but that hasn't stopped them from still receiving, and they know they don't own the property. That's always been a challenge. But they've been receiving capital grants all along, and they've been putting improvements in those buildings that I'm imagining that VTrans and others have understood that's gone on. So I'm going to push back a little too and say, I think that this, and it's really too late. This conversation should have taken place earlier. It's too late for that. I appreciate the fact that you are advocating for the economic development of your county, because that's essentially what you should do, and I think it's wonderful. But my position is advocating for the fairs and field days. I understand it's only 1 week, but this is also the Ag Committee. And while you're advocating for economic development, I know that you also advocate for agriculture, which is part of the fair. So I'm also doing my job, and I appreciate the conversation that's been going on in here. And I'll continue to come in and hope that we can find a great solution for everybody. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, this isn't, the end, this is just the beginning, so.
And Jackie, I'm working on language and have general agreement on the institutions committee and the capital bill that there might be one-time language to allow Franklin County to use their capital planning dollars for planning. And because they're not receiving their capital dollars now, because everyone does know they're not going to be making any investment that's going to last 20 years. So we've been looking for ways to give them a little more flexibility on those dollars from last year they couldn't receive, and then the dollars of this upcoming fiscal year they won't be able to receive, to start to do the planning they need to do to make that move. And there seems to be agreement there. So
that's a great idea. Thank you.
And that adds up to about $52,000,
Right.
which is something to get some engineering and permitting costs flowing. And then I agree with you. I think the capital bill should have a very nice size appropriation at some point in the future for Franklin County Field Days, but we got to wait till we get there. And I can tell you now, the challenge we face there is every fair needs a lot of money, but I've also been a proponent that the state should pay for all the stormwater work that needs to happen at the other fairs as well. And obviously that would be part of any new development, but we've stuck, I think the Champlain Valley Fair needs to put $3 million into stormwater infrastructure. And so we stuck these fairs with pretty high expenses. So I think we'll have to have our come to Jesus moment on that too.
So would I need to go and have you chatted with Chair Emmons over in the House? Because
no, that was just an idea.
Okay. It's a great idea. I love it.
That we talked about yesterday.
Okay.
So,
keep me posted on that, because if I can help, I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're gonna pick this up, another day or, maybe, we'll see how it goes next week, but, we've got another issue coming up here in a couple of 3 minutes, so thanks for jumping on, Jackie and, Trina and Gus, appreciate you coming by, and we'll work on this to see what the best route is to go.
Okay, well, whatever you decide, we'll make it work.
Yeah,
Thanks, Gus.
yeah, thank you, Gus.
So the FAA does, I'm looking for actual documentation, does prohibit agriculture on airports now. Period.
You better get that in writing.
Well, that's
You
what-
better just tell me.
That's what I'm
Parent-
doing. So that's my loophole out of the fee. is
Exactly.
They're already prohibited from that. So if we can get documentation from the FAA that says that, I'll
Yeah.
try to get that.
Darren Parent, the map you showed us though seemed to have a woodlot between, and it's not clear to me that it is airport land. Can you just help me understand that?
Trini might be the best one to ask on that.
Okay.
I'm not a specialist on the maps. I just was saying for the soils piece, they are cutting down a lot of trees. I can tell you that right now. It's part of the expansion, so.
All right.
Well, but those trees they're cutting, I would presume they're on
Yeah,
one
the
end
map
or the
isn't
other.
just all airport land. I think what it is it's showing soils around the airport on, because it doesn't show their parcel, but I can tell you where those color overlays are. Some of them are on property that's not, like when you cross 78, because it's showing us what those soils are. That's
No,
not airport.
I understand that, but the development, the
Yeah.
mitigation parcel that we're talking about isn't actually owned by the airport, as I thought I heard you say, and so therefore,
No, this one is, where we're really talking is where that field days is kind of, there's an MSA down at the bottom of that map, that kind of in the middle lower part, that's right where the field days stuff is. And that's that Missisquoi,
okay.
Loomy Sand
I can
thing.
step in here just a minute, Corey. If you look at the map that we sent, it's a soils map, so they do full plots. They don't look at property lines. And the land that's being talked about right now for development is, it's gonna be hard to explain, but on the right-hand side, you can see the land that's in red. There's a little bubble that says MSB.
Yeah,
Okay, that open area right there, that's where that's some of the property. Nope, I'm too far in, sorry. It's south of that. So where the MSB bubble is, that back corner, that's the kind of the back end of the property line. And that land comes down into the road where it says MSA. You can see all the little buildings. I don't know how it's like, yeah. There's like a road that goes through
This is all about.
where they do the tractor pulls. Can you see that in there?
Yeah, I do. I'm showing the Senator Star.
Yeah, where the MSA is, that's actually the district garage. That's right there. That's the outer boundary. And then they have that land, all those little buildings in there are theirs. And then it backs up to where it says MSC.
But Trini, would we be able to get documentation? I know I just sent you a note that from the FAA that says that they don't allow agricultural activity on airports now.
We can.
Yeah, I think that'll, to me, that's the key there is we're not, in my mind, we're not taking ag soils out of ag production. They've already been taken out of ag production. Like
That puts the mortar on the crack, Chris.
Let's hope.
Is Michael on this one? Thanks a lot, Trina, for spending some time with us, and we'll be in touch as we move on this particular subject.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
So we're kind of waiting for Michael to give us an overview on 466, and Pete Johnson is on the phone, I believe. We have Ryan Patch with us, and
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
yes, good morning. So we're kind of waiting for Michael to be with us. Usually he's tied up. Probably he's down in natural resources. But Ryan, Michael isn't here yet to give us details of 466, but I understand that you've been down in natural resources and have made some suggestive changes to the withdrawal. And I don't, maybe you could just give us a little overview on your thoughts behind that and the changes that you've recommended and how that has been going. You may as well get started because we only got 40 minutes or so, and we're probably run out of time.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning. Ryan Patch, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I was here today to listen to farmer testimony on H466. I provided an update to the committee via Zoom earlier this week. I believe didn't share the prepared testimony, which provides the factual basis for the agency's position on many of the requests that it's made on 466. But we've put together information about the current state of agricultural surface water withdrawals as it's known, and some of the history and potential future climate impacts. With regards to H466, there were three specific recommendations that the Agency of Agriculture made to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. Two of those were taken up by the committee. One is a provision which would not require metering for agricultural operations, a significant expense for essentially a research project to better understand impact when those current withdrawals are allowed under current state procedure. So that was taken up, and that was good to see. The second points that were made were around the fact that groundwater withdrawals for agriculture are exempt from registration reporting, and that includes springs. And so there's a bit of a conflict with the definition of springs and what that means as it relates to off-stream reservoirs and what I may colloquially call farm ponds, right? So ensuring that a farm pond that was constructed and used for farming and irrigation and is not a surface water, ensuring that withdrawals from that do not fall under a surface water withdrawal program. The agency felt was important. That has been amended. The latest draft has been amended to include that recommendation. The third point, but one that is very important, the committee declined to take up as an amendment in the bill, focuses on the current state water quality policy or procedure that ANR has adopted, which says that a de minimis water withdrawal, a withdrawal that even under drought conditions, does not cause an impact to surface water resources is allowed. And however, the ANR can consider cumulative effects. And so trying to take that current state procedure, ensure that it's reflected in the bill, so there is clear allowance for farmers or other surface water users to use their current property interests when they're not impacting water quality by withdrawing below de minimis amount. So some sort of policy statement which says, because this is not just a research or a registration reporting program to better understand surface water use, it also creates a future permit program. And so trying to create sideboards for a future permit program, which says there are withdrawals that happen. These withdrawals are so small, they don't affect water quality standards, therefore ensuring that they can continue to be allowed without requiring a permit and potentially paying to continue to use that water use is something the agency feels is important to have as a concept. So when the general permit process or the rule development and future permit implementation is conducted by ANR, there's clear direction that you don't need to regulate every withdrawal. There are certain withdrawals that are compatible with stream flow and are very important for agricultural users. That amendment was not taken up by the committee, so it's still a gap from the agency's perspective.
Was that not taken up because they didn't understand it? Was it not taken up because it came late, or was there scientific reasons why it wasn't taken up?
You'd have to ask the Chair Bray for more specificity. I think there was some apprehension about the first part of the statement. The statement comes essentially from current state procedure adopted by DEC. We consulted with DEC. DEC didn't think it was necessary, but didn't object to its inclusion. So there's not a conflict on the executive, on the state side or the agency side. So while anticipate that, and in testimony that DEC provided, they say they don't want to regulate every withdrawal, and I believe them. But ensuring clarity for 30 years from now, when the next surface water withdrawal rule amendment or permit program is amended, that there is a declaration that there are these withdrawals that are okay. They don't affect stream flow, and they should be allowed without a permit from the state of Vermont. That the agency think that's important, and the farmers that have spoken to this speak about how they are below the de minimis limits. And so it would ensure that a lot of the small veggie berry growers out there, or veggie berry growers in general in Vermont, while registration reporting will likely affect their operations, the future permit program may not affect them depending on where their farm is in the watershed.
So the permitting is gone?
Permitting is part of the bill, as I understand it. There's both a registration and reporting section, and then
I thought ag was exempt.
no, agriculture would not be exempt from that permitting if they're withdrawing above a de minimis amount.
Yeah, above, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael, here, so we'll have him run through the ag parts of the bill and any other parts that I guess we have questions on it.
Michael, have they voted it out?
No.
Now they're working on it, so. Well, what if they've got the bill, and if we come up with something we would ask to be changed, well, I guess we could always send it down there and have them look it over and change it, but we still got next week. Those days are coming and going. So good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Good to see you. And
What would you like me to walk through? Because you've got the bill, but then there's the proposed amendment from Senate Natural, which I've been authorized to share, which does include a change which might address some of the agricultural concerns. It does not include the change that Ryan Patch, Mr. Patch just discussed. The committee did not include that because they did not think it was necessary, but they think it is part of the rule that they will set a threshold where a permit will not be required. And that if the agency wants to argue for what that threshold should be, they can do so during rulemaking. So that's why it was not added, because a de minimis is implied.
I don't like leaving that to rulemaking. I don't like leaving that kind of stuff to rulemaking. That's the most frustrating part is we pass something 2 years later, we come back. Like, we didn't ever mean to do it like that. Well, it happened in rulemaking.
Was there any reasoning why they didn't put that in the bill? And leave it to,
As it's implied. The language says that the agency is going to set a permit program and a volume by which a permit will be required. Anything under that would be de minimis.
okay, so
But without knowing what under that means.
isn't that 5,000 a day?
No, that's just the registration and reporting. The permit authority and what volume will be required is going to be set during, what volume will require a permit will be set during rulemaking. So you don't know what withdrawal volume will require a permit currently. The registration and reporting is for the purpose of creating an inventory of those surface water withdrawals out there, providing the data that can be analyzed to determine where an appropriate threshold is for setting a permitting standard.
So why wouldn't we, if we're gonna do a bill, and the bill is supposedly to collect data, so why wouldn't we collect the data, have it reported back to the committee, and then the committee would decide what gallonage to use from the findings of the material that they're collecting?
That is a viable alternative.
I mean, the horses hate backing up the wagon, and I think you understand that, sir. Maybe some senators don't. But it's a bummer to try to get a horse to back a wagon up, and they'll pull it ahead. And this is getting the cart. I mean, we're gonna collect this data, and then we're telling DEC, I believe it's DEC,
Correct.
to set the numbers.
Correct.
Well, what happened, I mean, that's what I get elected to come here for, is to make important decisions that are gonna affect my constituents. The governor's job is to hire people, 800 of them, to sit over there in offices and to find work for themselves. Well, this is finding work for them to do that we should be doing, as far as I'm concerned. That's what I get elected for. I don't know, maybe I'm messed up on that, but people have been sending me here for a lot of years, and I think
Who's on the rules? Like, who tends to be on like our rulemaking? It's the,
Who's on Elcar right now?
yeah.
Senator McDonald, at least Senator Gray, Senator
That's what I want to rulemaking.
Senator Lyons. I can't think of the.
Probably Senator Benning or Senator Brock.
I think it's
Benning's
Benning.
named him. That's what I want to send it because you don't have to count to 3, 16, 76, 16, and 1 when you go there. You just have to count enough.
So do you have any of the amendments?
I do.
Yeah,
I
why
do.
don't we run through the whole thing?
Okay, Linda, could you put that document up? I'm gonna stand up and walk through it because I find it easier to do.
Sure,
Yes.
whatever.
Is this the correct document?
Yes. So I'll walk through all the instances of amendment. The highlighting is really to show Senate Natural the changes from their last draft of this amendment. In the first amendment, this is a change to the definition of surface water. In the bill as passed the House, it had said that surface water included ponds, lakes, and springs. And the Agency of Agriculture raised the point that under the groundwater withdrawal program, withdrawals from springs are regulated under the groundwater withdrawal program. And I won't go into the reason why, but basically what was proposed is that springs would be removed, and all bodies of surface waters is already included in the definition of surface water. So effectively, if there's a spring that's reaching the surface and it's being withdrawn from by the user, the Agency of Natural Resources may be able to assert the surface water withdrawal requirements under this bill. And so takes away the conflict with the groundwater withdrawal by including springs, but surface water is going to be included under the surface water
A
program.
spring, what about a deep well pump? If a farmer thought that that was kind of onerous, this whole bill, could they drill a well and pump from that?
Groundwater wells are exempt from the groundwater, agricultural wells are exempt from the groundwater withdrawal permit program.
So that, at least that is exempt.
Right, a farmer who's irrigating from surface water right now could drill a well, start irrigating from the well, and would not be subject to surface water or groundwater withdrawal permitting.
Or if they had a pond or their own pond.
Right, and we'll get to that in a minute too. That's actually the next amendment, still in the definition of surface water. There have been, this is what is not a surface water. So there's a provision in that definition that provides what is not a surface water. It previously had said constructed farm ponds or other impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering of livestock and that are not subject to the Vermont water quality standards. The Agency of Agriculture was concerned about that language. I'm not exactly sure why, but with consulting with the Agency of Natural Resources, they agreed to remove the reference to the Vermont water quality standards and instead say constructed off-stream farm ponds or other off-stream impoundments that are used for irrigation or watering. So these are not surface waters. So withdrawals from this are not subject to the registration, reporting, or permit.
Is D in the bill now?
It is. Well, this is the amendment.
Yeah.
But
So
D,
why-
but D is in the bill. But D is in the bill as
Why is D on the second line? It says watering of livestock. What about vegetables? I mean,
well, that's what irrigation is.
irrigation covers everything else.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
If you guys have any questions, Chris, if you can hear us, if you have any questions, just speak up.
Will do, thanks.
So then moving down into the second instance of amendment, this is the registration requirement. It's the registration requirement for anyone. And so it had previously been any person withdrawing 5,000 gallons or more of surface water within a 24-hour period or 150,000 gallons over any 30-day period. There was some testimony in Senate Natural Resources, most notably from Mr. Rich, who I think is on the call, or on the Zoom about how you would be triggering if a farmer for one particular day or one particular use exceeded 5,000 gallons, but never would exceeded 5,000 gallons again in a 24-hour period, that they would be brought into this program. So the chair of Senate Natural has proposed moving from 5,000 to 10,000, but still keeping the 5,000 daily average for the 30-day period. So if a farmer is going to have a discrete need for up to 10,000 gallons on any particular day, they won't need to report. But if they're averaging the use of 5,000 gallons a day over 30 days, they would need to report.
See, that would make sense to me that the 10, I mean, from what we've heard, 5,000 gallons isn't a lot of water when you've got a big veggie thing. And you might have to use 10,000 gallons today because it's been hotter and blazes, no rain. But you wouldn't need to use that tomorrow as well, or then maybe even the next day. So as long as you can get your veggies covered, so they're damp enough, with one shot of water, which might take 10,000 gallons. And your total for the month is 150. I should think we'd be fine, but we'll hear from the berry guys. If you guys have any questions, speak up. Brian?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still wondering, who decides what a 30-day period is? Who decides when that starts and when it ends?
It's any 30-day period. So this is going to be an annual report.
Yeah.
So if you do this over any 30-day period during a year, then you will be subject to the reporting.
So it would be up to the farmer to keep track of his daily subtraction, so to speak.
Yes.
Good golly, Miss Molly.
Which leads into the next amendment. There was concern, especially for those farmers that were withdrawing over 50,000 gallons, that they would have to install expensive metering systems for their surface water withdrawals, because if you, underneath the original language, if you were withdrawing more than 50,000 gallons, you needed to provide meter data. Well, so what was built in is an exception to A and B for farming or for irrigation or watering of livestock, more than 10,000 gallons within a 24-hour period or 150. They can provide that information based on log records pursuant to a technically appropriate method approved by the Secretary of Natural Resources. So instead of having to do metering, they can provide basically their log records.
Yeah. So actually, they're basically exempt from
the
buying meters.
From the meter.
Well, meters pretty expensive and costly to maintain, so. And many times not that.
So should I move on?
Yep.
Going down into the third instance of amendment, this addressed a concern from the Agency of Transportation and the Association of General Contractors on many federal transportation and infrastructure projects. There's dust mitigation requirements, and they use surface water withdrawals often to fill the trucks, the tankers that are used for the dust mitigation. They were concerned that they would have to get A&R approval before every withdrawal. And instead, what was built in the Secretary of Natural Resources general permitting authority, A&R shall issue a general permit for withdrawal of surface water for standard municipal infrastructure project. And that general permit shall establish a rate and withdrawal volume that only requires notification of the Secretary and does not require Secretary approval prior to withdrawal.
They don't.
So it's basically you don't have to get approval prior to the surface water withdrawal, but you need to report what that withdrawal is.
The total withdrawal.
Right, well, what they're gonna do, they're gonna set a rate and a withdrawal volume that doesn't require pre-approval. And if you're underneath that rate and withdrawal volume, you just notify A&R of the withdrawal. And this is something that the AOT and the general contractors both agreed to.
Well, I mean, why not? There isn't anything they've got to do.
Or they have to report.
Well, I mean, yeah, but if they're under a certain limit, you think they'll ever get over the limit?
They still have to report, right? It only requires notification and does not require that pre-approval. They'll be required to report, but they won't be required to get pre-approval. And then last is a pre-rulemaking public consultation, input and outreach requirement before A&R goes to official rulemaking. Under the APA, they are required to conduct public input and outreach with interested parties. And that public input and outreach shall include an opportunity for interested parties to comment on a draft rule for surface water withdrawals.
So that's basically the bill as amended.
These are the amendments to the bill, the underlying bill, yes.
Any other sections dealing with ag in that bill?
Those are largely it. I mean, there are other provisions in here that say that, withdrawal does not include direct consumption of surface water by livestock. So that's an agricultural interest. But other than that, I think those are largely the agricultural provisions.
Yeah. Hey, Pete, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, did you hear Michael and his explanations of what was what are in the amendments that are going to be offered to the bill?
Yeah, both Ryan and Michael's presentations were super helpful.
Yeah, and you want to introduce yourself and tell the crew what year, how many veggies you grow or acres or whatever, and then give us your thoughts in regards to the proposals.
Yeah, I'm Pete Johnson. I run Pete's Greens in Craftsbury. We grow about 100 acres of vegetables and a couple hundred acres of cover crops and hay. I think that the thing that's still going on here is I don't think there's much comprehension of how little water 5,000 or 10,000 gallons is. I'm going to read a little excerpt from Vern Grubinger, our revered extension agent. I'm sure many of you know him or know of him. He says that 5,000 gallons is far lower than other states require. It will capture thousands of irrigation events with no significant impact on surface water flow. It adds one more administrative burden and less opportunity cost to the many small and medium scale diversified farmers that the state supposedly wants to support. In theory, shouldn't all homeowners irrigating their lawns or gardens with town water that comes from reservoirs, which is also surface water, also be reporting? That's an interesting point because my hose on my house, my garden hose, runs 7 gallons a minute, which is 5,000 gallons in 12 hours or 10,000 gallons in 24 hours. So even at the 10,000 gallon number, hundreds of homeowners throughout the state who are filling swimming pools or irrigating new lawns or irrigating large gardens should also be reporting. And I don't know if the state has pondered, you know, how they're going to educate that group of people and make this all so it's, you know, it should, if everybody has to report, everybody has to report. So I think that's just a good example of how little water even 10,000 gallons is. And, you know, even small farms in Vermont, you know, even small 5 or 10 acre vegetable farms may end up having 50 or 100 reporting days per year, even more if they use surface waters to irrigate greenhouses, which many of us do. That could extend up to maybe 120 individual reporting days. I'm all for the state collecting data about this. I think it's appropriate. I understand the desire to understand what water is being used where. I think a weekly or monthly reporting average is much more sensible. You know, this is going to be a lot of admin work, and as the point Vern makes, thousands of daily reports that have no effect on, you know, the actual, you know, no significant effect on the quantity of water flowing in surface waters. Weekly or yeah, go ahead.
Pete, why don't we, how often do you have to report?
Annually.
So you only have to report once a year, Pete.
Yeah, but you have to do daily tracking.
Right.
Every time you're over 5,000 or 10,000 gallons, depending on how this works out in its current form.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 10 right now.
Yeah.
But the other question that I have is, if you do 100 acres and I do 10 acres, do you get any allowance because you're 10 times bigger than I am? Or do we both get 10,000 gallons? Or if you divided your 100 acres up into 10 acre plots, would you get 10 different allotments up to 10,000 gallons? Or do you get one, which is Pete's Greens, 10,000 gallons and you're done? How, Michael, what was it?
It's an interesting point. There is no distinction about size of use or size of acreage in which the water will be used. Whether or not a person could manipulate the withdrawal provisions based on parcelage, say non-contiguous parcels, and say that they're withdrawing below the thresholds on both of those, and therefore it's not reportable. That's an interesting point. I think that's something that people might be able to argue.
Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense what I'm thinking, but if I owned 100 acres and had 10 kids, each kid could own 10 acres and there wouldn't be really any reporting as long as they were under the 10,000 gallons. And but if I'm out there with a corporation, then Bobby Star Incorporated, that's one. So I get penalized, but I mean, I think, well, anyways, Justin?
Thank you, Senator Starr. I just wanted to point out that we're getting pretty far ahead of ourselves, because one of the concerns that the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association has is this bill was passed without documenting any actual problem. We have not had instances of the Otter Creek being dried up from irrigation, or the Huntington River, having fish dying in small pools because of irrigation. We are in one of the wettest states in the union with a very low population density and a relatively small amount of farmers doing any irrigation at all. Almost no dairy farmers irrigate. Vegetable and berry growers operate on 3,000 acres on the entire state, I believe, which is one large farm in California worth of vegetables. In California, those 3,000 acres of vegetables would each be watered with multiple acre feet of water. That's, 3 feet of water over an acre over the course of the year. On my farm, we probably average 2 acre inches, maybe, of water, but that's still 50,000 gallons. So it's just an issue of like, I understand water issues are huge in other parts of the country. We have a tremendous amount of water here, and I'm not saying we should be wasting it, but the irony is we use desert irrigation here for the most part. We irrigate with drip tape, which is little tubes with perforations that drip out teeny amounts of water steadily over multiple hours. Because pumping water costs money and time, I'm not going to pump a drop more than I need to. And in fact, most of the time, we're trying to get rid of water because it rains all the time here. I get 60 inches of rain a year at my house. That's a temperate rainforest. So I really, and it's kind of a cliche, but this bill seems to me sort of like a solution in search of a problem, given the climate and agriculture of Vermont. If you look at neighboring states, New York's reporting requirement is 100,000 gallons. New Hampshire's, I believe, 50. I believe Massachusetts is 50. But those are all states with higher population densities and more farms. Maybe there's a situation where somebody downriver from me is trying to flood irrigate 80 acres of lavender. I don't know. And they could suck the river dry, I suppose, in that situation. But as far as I know, that is not a problem in this state. And maybe something could be done to mitigate that sort of extreme example. But right now, especially at 5,000 or even 10,000 gallon reporting threshold per day, it's so little water. Our drip tape, let's say I grow 5 acres of winter squash on drip tape. If I irrigate all that for 5 hours, which is a normal cycle, that's 35,000 gallons of water once a week on this one 5 acre block. 5 acre block of winter squash is very small. It's medium sized for Vermont, but we have a very small amount of this type of land. And this is the type of agriculture, as Pete said, we're trying to encourage in the state, diversified farms that grow food for our local communities. So I do want to say I appreciate that the Natural Resources Committee did put in the pond exclusion. They removed the metering requirements because that would have been very onerous. That would have been at least 30 grand on my farm to put in meters, and the spring clarification is fantastic. But a big problem also with this bill is it doesn't take into account small withdrawals from large rivers and large withdrawals from small rivers. Flowing right by the Winooski right now is right now it's about 600 million gallons of water a day. In July, it's about 200 million gallons. It does not seem reasonable for a farmer in Middlesex to report a 6,000 gallon withdrawal. It's such a small number. So I'm with Pete that if that number were either tied to de minimis thresholds, which takes into account the size of the watershed, or was up closer to a 50,000 gallon a day number, that just removes all the noisy small data points. And frankly, removes the burden from a lot of very small farms that might not even really fully understand the rules and are not really compromising their watersheds. Sorry to ramble.
No, that's fine,
Very good.
Justin. Senator Pearson has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Justin, appreciate you've been a clear voice on this. It's so tricky because we've got to have one rule kind of for the state, and you make a compelling case why the river going by your house is not at risk. But I guess I'm torn. Maybe I'm not alone. I want to make sure we're promoting particularly diversified ag, but I'm also concerned that we're totally blind right now to this dynamic. And so, do you think what's the solution to not being blind and have it be really unburdensome? That's if we're successful, that's the point that I'd like to hit is that. So I'd be curious, you were talking about the de minimis test that is going to keep us blind, but maybe it's reasonable. But I would just be curious if you've done any thinking on that. to that maybe could help us?
I actually have thought about that because you're right, we are blind to this. And my flood irrigating lavender scenario is a theoretical possibility. Somebody could do that. By flood irrigation, I mean just like open it up and put a foot of water on their fields. There'll be a lot of water. The de minimis rules currently take into account the size of the watershed. So above my farm, we have 27 square miles of watershed draining by my farm. There's a calculation that the DEC figured out 20 years ago to tell me how much water I can take given that size watershed. If you go down to the lower Winooski, it's, I don't know, a couple hundred square miles of watershed. Therefore, more water funnels by those farms. They can take more water on the de minimis. Perhaps we take a de minimis number, cut it in half for reporting, and the de minimis is still, you can't take above that. So that's what that means right now. Maybe a reporting threshold tied to the de minimis at some fraction below it. And I'm just ballparking here, maybe half. Because I think even I'm on a small river, pretty high up in the watershed, and I think my de minimis is 38,000 gallons a day just at this one pump station on my highest field. Small river, 38,000 gallons a day is the de minimis. And I don't hit that because I only drip irrigate.
And how does that standard work if there was 5 farms hitting that under that threshold? Does the standard change based on what's being used, or that's just assumed some metric of use that is calculated into that? Do you have any idea?
To my knowledge, there's not been any case law built around that problem. Because again, there are very few vegetable and fruit farms in the state of acreage. And most of the large irrigators are along the large riverways, the Connecticut, the Winooski, the Lamoille, the Missisquoi, the West, bigger rivers that have millions of gallons flowing by every day. You know, in our small watersheds, I'm the only vegetable farm. In the Mad River Valley, I think there's only 2. You know,
The best soils are along the rivers, so that's where the veggie guys try to grow veggies if they can. And along Connecticut River must have a lot, Winooski and all of them.
Yeah, they're
So
mostly
Pete,
where the water is.
Pete, do you have other questions?
No, I don't know if anybody, maybe Senator Pearson or somebody else there has any background on where the 5,000, the 10,000 gallon numbers came from and why they've been so persistent.
Michael, do you?
Particularly,
Ryan was on the study committee.
Brian,
He should probably tell you where the 5,000 number.
where'd that number come from, Brian?
Not sure. There was discussion, my memory is DEC proposed that as a threshold because when you are wanting to do a program to understand use that may have an impact on very small watersheds, you set the threshold very low. And that's where the 5,000 is going to get most every water withdrawal of size in the state. And so I think that's where it came from. Throughout the study committee process, I did suggest that seems very low relative to current de minimis allowances and the burden on farmers, but the study report came out with that 5,000 as a.
Now it's been bumped to 10, right?
And the committee, the Senate Natural Committee looked at a table I created of surrounding, well, about 13 states, not necessarily surrounding eastern states. And as Mr. Rich pointed out, the numbers in neighboring states are 50 to 100, but there are some states where it's 10. Several states where it's 10, or average as 10 per day over a 30-day period. So I wasn't informed of why they went to 10, but I expect it was after looking at the table, they saw that other states used it.
Yeah. Justin?
Yeah, and something Ryan mentioned just kind of sparks to me that I'd like to remind the committee that nobody in the vegetable farming or fruit farm community was even alerted that this bill was going through the House. No farmer testimony was taken. And I think the way it is written reflects a lack of agricultural context that, you know, has our community's hackles up a little bit. nobody can answer the question of why 5,000 gallons was written. And it's because people didn't realize that that's a really, really, really small number when you're talking field scale production, even small Vermont field scale production. It's small. Like, those little 2-inch pumps that you see everywhere, like contractors have them for sump pumping basements, that'll suck out 10,000 gallons in 2 hours. These are small numbers, very small numbers. Remember, acre feet in California, fractions of acre inches in Vermont is what irrigation is. And I see our water resources as mostly like a resource / liability, just because we have so much of it most of the time. It's hard for a vegetable farmer to contemplate like people seeing water for the most part as a scarce thing that we need to be protecting. Not saying we waste it, but most of us farmers are 9 times out of 10 battling excess rainfall, not irrigation.
So you guys didn't testify in the House?
So we're putting all this stormwater infrastructure across the states. We have too much water. In Burmese. Same thing.
So,
Can I say one more thing, Senator Starr, just before, not to monopolize the room, but I do want to say,
you're not telling us very good news. We got a bill that wasn't even looked at basically in the House by any agricultural. Sure, go ahead.
a lot of farmers in the state, especially vegetable and fruit farmers, came into their careers from an environmental perspective. We want to be doing a good job with our landscape. There is nobody intentionally wasting water. It just does not happen. If we're showing a problem, if a river or a stream is compromised, I'm not going to irrigate out of that. I'll find another way. I'll grow different crops. I'll ration, whatever we need to do. But we need to see a real problem, not straw man problems that have extremely onerous reporting requirements as part of a perceived solution. And I appreciate that the Natural Resources Committee heard us so many times, but while we were there, I don't know how well we were actually heard from an agricultural community's perspective.
No, I don't know if we've anybody from ag in there to speak of on our side. I don't know about the House side, but House Ag usually looks at those bills that come out of natural, I guess. I don't know if it got by them or what happened. But
My understanding is the bill was only in the House for 21 days, which to my understanding is a very short time. So perhaps it just didn't sit on somebody's desk long enough. There is some rumblings that some folks on that committee are not happy about not having really gotten to take a look at it, but I can't really say with any specificity.
Yeah.
That's more rumblings.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin, you hit the nail on the head for me. I used to say a priest from a small parish, so it's just one voice here, but I think you're right. I haven't read any headline that says, oh my gosh, the creeks run dry and we got a big problem here in Vermont. I don't know what the problem is. I assume Ryan's crew didn't come up with an issue and flag it for further study. I'm mystified as to how this even started up. And whether you use the word blind or you just say we don't have the data, that's okay. But maybe the data is not needed right now because usually in this building, we find a problem and then we try to solve it by enacting certain legislation. I don't think there's a problem here, and I'm on your side on this. I don't know what's going on. That's all. Just wanted to make that statement.
And I agree with Pete Johnson. Like, we're okay for some sort of a data collection, but to tie data collection with permitting in the same bill with language to be ironed out later.
Well, by a bunch of bureaucrats too, not by us that you elect to come here to represent you.
Yeah.
I mean,
we want to be part of part of any solution that there is, but a solution requires a problem.
Well, thanks. Did you have anything else, Pete, that you wanted to offer?
No, I'm good. I appreciate you guys listening to this. And again, I'm in favor of some level of data collection. I just think it should be sensible and geared towards efficiency and not ridiculously overly detailed to the point where we're just collecting so many small events that have no impact on anything. It's not just a burden to farmers, it's also a burden to state regulators who have to collect and deal with all that data as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Peter, is your land all contiguous or is it in different sized plots?
It's incredibly non-contiguous. It's all over.
So you're gonna have to do a lot of adding then at the end of the day, if you water it all.
Yeah, it's,
I mean-
we, in a typical day, we have maybe an irrigation event or two, kind of like Justin was describing. You know, he drip irrigates his winter squash. Many years we don't irrigate at all up here. We've gone many years with no irrigation at all. And so we don't have, though I might have, you know, crops in 15 or 20 different fields in a given year, many of them don't even have irrigation at all. And then the ones that do, maybe in a dry, 1 or 2 things per day. So it's not a huge amount of individual events. It's just, I just think, go ahead.
Do you have irrigation in all those fields?
No, not at all. We probably only have irrigation potential in about a third of our land base.
Yeah.
But
And
we tend to focus crops that need it and are more critical to financial success in places where we can irrigate if we need to.
yeah. Well, any other questions from the committee?
Also,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Justin and Pete. It's good to hear from you, and we'll take all of your advice under consideration. And sorry about what happened over on the health side, but we can try to right it on this side.